Good afternoon. Welcome to IFDF's Straight Talk webinar series. We are so glad that you have joined us. My name is Ruth Bedell, and I'm the Associate Director for Outreach of the Independent Funeral Directors of Florida. We have held 26 of these Straight Talk continuing education webinar series or webinars since we began the series back in August 2020 during the first year of the pandemic. To qualify for continuing education credit, you must be an IFDF member, that is, a firm establishment owner, individual member, or affiliate member. You must attend the full webinar. You must log into Zoom using your full name and remain logged in to the webinar for the entirety of the event. Immediately after the event, if you haven't already done so, please forward your Florida license number to me at rbedell@ifdf.org to request the 1-hour CE credit for this course. After we verify full attendance, we will issue documentation granting credit within 4 weeks post-event or sooner. Thank you. We are excited about this month's Straight Talk on strategic partnerships with the Florida End-of-Life Doula Association. I would like to introduce the moderator of the webinar, William Turner Heath. William is the FDIC of funeralbookings.com and consults for a variety of for-profit and nonprofits looking to bring innovation into their organizations. Bridging the professional, spiritual, and artistic is of utmost importance to William. To that end, and in his current capacity as funeral director, he has rounded out his education with an end-of-life doula certificate through the University of Vermont in 2020. William is currently in training as an interfaith minister at the Alliance of Divine Love, while he concurrently volunteers at Haven Hospice every Thursday morning. I will now turn this webinar over to Will so he can introduce the speakers. Thank you, Will. Will, you are muted.
I did it again. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really excited about this opportunity to bring two associations together to discuss some opportunities here. These two organizations are very independently minded, and this is a really important thing. The IFDF celebrated its 30th anniversary this past June, and the Florida End-of-Life Doula Association is actively being born right now. Many of the people here today sit on the board of directors, and this is a really exciting opportunity to seed some conversations. I'd like to first introduce Shanti Vani. She is the switchboard operator and has been holding space since the day one of FIELDA.
Thank you, Will. Yes, I'm just so glad to be here. My history with end-of-life doula work started in 2018. My mother died in April, and I had been taking care of her with Alzheimer's. And I went on in the summer to New York City, and I was trained with an ELDA, International End-of-Life Doula Association. And I came back to Gainesville thinking that I was the pioneer, the only one. And then I saw a notice where one of our members was giving a talk, and she was an end-of-life doula. And it just so happened this woman had done ritual at my wedding in 2004. So we were old friends and connected. So we started conversations about death and dying. I think we can go to the next slide. There's a visual of our conversations about back one about death and dying was something we did at the library. And it was just an open 1-hour open meeting for anyone in the public to join us and just talk about can we go to the previous slide, or is it not going to work? I don't know. There it is. Yeah. To talk about issues related to death and dying and loss. And we went on with that for at least a good year and a half. And it was once a month. So then in February of 2020, I think we can go to the next slide. February of 2020, we had a weekend conference, really, here in Gainesville of people from around Florida who were trained doulas. And we hammered out this mission statement. As a network of Florida End-of-Life Doulas, we provide resources, non-medical care, and compassionate support to the dying, their families, and friends. We serve as advocates to ensure the wishes of those who are in the death process are respected. So that's our draft mission. And we may be making adjustments to that. Our vision is to provide respectful, compassionate, inclusive, empowering, comforting care, education, resources, preparation for death or transition to dying people and their families and friends. So we really hold to a high standard. We are educating one another. So anyway, in March, right after we had our weekend conference workshop, March, COVID hit. And so everything went on to Zoom, of course. And we started Zoom meetings, I believe it was probably June of 2020. Gainesville was having them every Thursday morning, every week for quite a while. And then we started opening it up to people around the state and just inviting people in. So, and then we also, at the same time, we launched our Facebook group. Now, if you go to the Florida End-of-Life Doula Association Facebook group, it's open to anyone, anywhere. It's just a wide open forum for people to talk and meet. Then we also have a private group for the trained doulas. And in 2021, we can switch to the next slide. Okay, and that's what I was just talking about. There's a few of us here. Well, there's Ashley. Next slide, please. Oh, okay. So in 2020, we also had some publicity. Senior Times Magazine did a really nice article, and I think Will's going to put the link to that article in the chat. So anyone who wants to click on that can see, but people love to get to hear about what we're doing. You know, there's an eagerness in the community. We also, next slide, please. In 2021, we had a Zoom meeting for National Healthcare Decisions Day, and it was the Conversation Project. It was a great meeting. And again, there's a link to this talk, which is actually just a bit over an hour. Most of what we really do is education. And then so I'm going to jump forward to 2022. This board started meeting in September. And we meet every other week, and we are still in the new baby forming time. We can go to the next slide, please. And so these are some of our goals. I'm not going to sit here and read them all, but basically, you know, the more people talk about these things, the easier it is for us. It's spreading so beautifully in the community now, especially after COVID. So we just mostly want to be able to normalize the conversation, get people comfortable with the uncomfortable. And so I guess, let's see, next slide. Yeah, okay, for myself, some final thoughts are that, you know, some people still resist the idea that doulas are needed. They're like, oh, we're good, we've got it. Hospice people sometimes say, yeah, we do everything you do. Families don't feel like they need help, but to have a calm outside person who's educated and informed enter the situation can really alleviate the stress for everyone involved. So that's it for me. I'm going to pass it on to Lynn. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanti. I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to talk about what doulas do, a little bit about what we don't do. And you could start with the first slide, please. One thing I want to say is, you know, often people think that they're prepared for end of life because they've done their paperwork. And like Shanti said, there's so much more to it. So I'm going to go through what there is to it that we offer as doulas. We not only work in the practical senses, but in all these other ways. So physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental. And just a quick overview, adding on to what Shanti said. So as end-of-life doulas, we provide non-medical support, which is really important to know. We're not giving medication. We're not transferring patients from bed to chair, but we do offer comfort to the dying person and their family, which may include education, guidance, as well as emotional, spiritual, and practical care. And we prefer to work with people, the earlier the better, but sometimes we're there just at the very end. Next slide, please. So we'll start with the practical things. These are the things that we think of first off when it comes to caring for people. So we want to make sure people understand what their end-of-life options are. So there's a lot of education that happens with doulas. We might discuss their body disposition, where they want their final resting place to be, help them to understand their options in their area. We might ask them how they want to be cared for after death. So body care is part of that conversation. And I'll say this more than once. When it comes to body care, we understand that we are not funeral directors, and so we don't actually do that body care ourselves. We'll guide people in completion of their advance directives. So we'll make sure that they do have that paperwork component finished. We'll initiate those difficult conversations about death. And what's important about that is we want everyone that's caring for them and loves them to understand and respect what that dying person wants. We make sure that we have cultural awareness of the people we're caring for and not imposing our own beliefs and values on them. We're going to help educate loved ones and caretakers about what to expect in the dying process. We may create living funerals with people who want to have those celebrations before they die. We can help create and perform funeral services. Some of us are life cycle celebrants or funeral celebrants. We can help with planning home funerals and vigil planning, which is sitting at the bedside. So we're going to go to the next slide, please. So in this next slide, we're talking about the physical body. And this is more in terms of the body before death. So how they want to be cared for in those last weeks and months and days. So we'll talk about how we provide comfort care. Some of us are massage therapists, or we offer energy work, Reiki, just comforting touch. We may offer a guided meditation, which is really helpful when people have end-of-life fear and anxiety, and not just for that dying person, but we offer that to anyone in the family that may need that. We do legally provide mouth care. So when people are no longer eating and drinking, the mouth can become dry. We want to make sure that they're comfortable. So we provide mouth care. We may create soothing environments with favorite music or scents, or arranging the rooms in ways that give people comfort. Maybe they want their bed facing their garden, something that gives them joy. We may become gatekeepers to help schedule visitors so as not to overwhelm. We may support and guide through VSED, which is a legal form of hastening death. It's called voluntary stopping of eating and drinking. We may guide the family in after-death body care, like I said earlier. So the families may want to care for their dying loved one themselves before they go on to their final resting place. And we're going to make sure we do that within the scope of our practice. We're going to support their pain management preferences in terms of how much medication they may want or not want. And again, we're not providing that medication, but we want to be an advocate for what they want. And we're going to be a loving, calming presence at the bedside during the active dying phase. Next slide, please. So we support on an emotional level, and you can imagine this is a really big one when it comes to people dying. Often a lot of emotions arise, sometimes unexpected. So we are going to be great listeners. We're going to listen without the need to fix. We're going to listen without interjecting our own experiences. We're going to help the dying person create goals for healing relationships and completion in relationships. And that may include coming up with forgiveness practices that may help them. We might ask questions like, who do you want to forgive, or who do you need to forgive, and who do you need to ask forgiveness of? So encouraging those kind of conversations. We'll encourage scheduled visits and contact with important relationships. And sometimes when things are out of our scope in terms of family dynamics, we may offer a therapist to step in when it's something more than what we are trained to do. And many of our doulas, such as Shanti and Keely, offer grief support as well. Next slide, please. And we also work in the spiritual realm. So we're going to honor their beliefs. will provide spiritual support, and that may mean simply lighting a candle. It may mean reading a favorite prayer or story. We may play songs according to their religion or spiritual belief. And we may create rituals such as anointing the body. And at times we may contact their spiritual leader if that's something that they need in order to move on. And the next slide, please. And lastly, this fifth domain, the mental domain, this is where we talk about creating legacy projects. So sometimes there's important things that need to be completed, or they want to leave something memorable for family members. So we might talk about life meaning. So we might discuss how they contributed to the world. We might ask them questions like, how do you want to be remembered? And we're going to support their life's work and whatever that needs, whatever that looks like in order to feel complete in those ways. So I know that is a lot. So a lot of things that we do and a few things that we don't do. And we're going to go on now to Ashley Johnson. She's going to talk about where doulas are.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lynn. Can we go to the next slide, please? And here I'm actually going to prompt a poll question to get some engagement going. So if we can we go ahead and prompt that, please? All right, so the question is, where do you find end-of-life doulas? And I wish I had some Jeopardy music, I would be playing it, but I don't want to make anybody any nervous. All right. I think that's been quite a bit of a time to go ahead and answer. If we can we go ahead and end the poll and see some results here? Oh, nice. I love that it's all the way scattered. Yes. And I'm going to go ahead and share that all of those answers were true. You can find us in hospice, hospitals, community organizations, your Google search, the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance, and as well as reaching out to any of the panelists that are here today. All right, so we can go ahead and close out of that. Can we move on to the next slide, please? All right, so unless the family has pre-planned, funeral directors don't come into the picture until after death has occurred. Yet, funeral directors are the integral part of the final deposition process. As Lynn shared earlier, death doulas can come into the picture to work with individuals and families ranging from logistical planning at the time of death, before death, and during death, as well as conducting those rituals and comforting practices. We can step in by helping the dying person realize and reflect on their life values while explaining the bodily functions of dying to their caregivers. We are here to serve humanity, ranging from young, elderly, terminally ill, healthy, caretakers, and even pets. End-of-life doulas, they complement the care from hospice, hospitals, and funeral homes during the dying process. Some doulas have private practices, while others work in connection with hospice, hospitals, or other community organizations. Doulas can also be celebrants, hospice staff, and even massage therapists. Keep in mind, each doula has their own specialty. This is why it's best to interview your doula to see where their specialty lies, to see how they can complement the services offered at your funeral home. Some may prefer to do advanced directives, or like Shanti, she prefers to do grief support, but all are dedicated to supporting the communities that they serve with the transition. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Awesome. And here I just wanted to share some tips to cultivate a partnership or even the conversation with end-of-life doulas. In my own work with funeral homes, I have provided comfort care to families immediately after death, And this can include following up with periodic phone calls and home visits, as well as really just checking in to make sure that they are handling the grieving process and that they don't feel like they're just a transaction. Because when it comes to customer service, what keeps families and communities coming back to funeral establishments is how you leave them feeling. Because honestly, it's not what you say, people remember how you made them feel. And this will in turn make people more enticed to come back and revisit to get this same experience. And often it's word of mouth that leads other people to share about your business. I want to highlight that end-of-life doulas are not competitors with funeral homes. And in the funeral home industry, we're simply here to complement the services by providing additional support and community resources for the families and their deceased individuals. Death doulas offer different services from funeral homes and crematories. And I want to make sure I make that loud and clear. We are working in collaboration because we are aware of the laws and the Cemetery and Funeral Act as well. Our ultimate goal is to bring families and communities into that death space and normalize it. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and pass it on over to Keely so she can explain the benefits of end-of-life doulas working within the funeral home space.
You're muted, Keely.
Thank you. I forgot that. That would help. Next slide, please. And I'm happy to be here. I'm very grateful that we have this opportunity to be here and have this presentation with you all. Next slide, please. So doulas, end-of-life doulas are really your allies. We share a mission to serve the community. Like funeral home personnel, doulas are deeply vested in serving the community and to providing a level of comfort and care in realms related to death, though not actual death care. End-of-life doulas provide a spiritual dimension in a practical way with death education and by encouraging people to plan for this auspicious life event. We're preparing people in this heart-forward type of work, which we're approaching from different angles with the objective to create deep trust and engagement with the community. It's a calling to serve the community in this way. You know, community engagement, advocacy, doulas smooth the way and do a lot of the heavy emotional lifting that perhaps funeral care staff may not have the bandwidth to fulfill due to time constraints or staffing levels. Doulas are preparing the community for what's inevitable because everyone will at some point experience this sacred rite of passage. End-of-life doulas are building trust in the community, shining the light on death, which has become an unknown for most people. Death has become outcast in a way, and end-of-life doulas are bringing death back into the circle of life by normalizing this rite of passage. With education and death literacy comes personalization. As the community becomes more comfortable with talking about death, well, then there is involvement. The taking of steps to personalize their final transition and make it more meaningful to them and their families. End-of-life doulas advocate for consumer understanding around the importance of rituals for emotional completion. Death doesn't happen on a schedule, not yet at least. We can plan though, and in doing so, we can help to provide families with a framework that helps to minimize family distress and financial burden. There are many pathways to providing spiritual, emotional, physical, and practical support. Funeral homes excel at the time of death, while end-of-life doulas are the bridge beforehand and afterward. They are the lead-in. They come to hug the before and after death occurs. They bring value to families and have earned a level of deep trust with the family. As Ashley mentioned, Doulas come from all walks of life and provide a broad and deep wealth of knowledge and life experience. They may be therapists, former health providers, body workers, service professionals, grief educators, life coaches, or celebrants like Lynn, a role which is so important for those without formal religious or church association for creating rituals of completion. Doulas are really like your additional staff on call at the time you need them without an employer-employee obligation. As you create strategic alliances with end-of-life doulas, you have a valuable resource at your fingertips to call upon as and when you need. With end-of-life doulas out in the community, engaging with families and businesses before death, they are an excellent referral resource. I invite you to get to know us and make a date to chat. Thank you, and I'm going to hand over back to William.
Thank you so much. This is such an enormous opportunity. And so as we transition from here to begin to get to know the individual doulas, can you move to the next slide, please, Ruth? I'd like us to really see some concrete actions today. I encourage you to visit our chat. If you'd like to get onto our email list, please drop your email contact in there. As each of the doulas presents their individual practice and you get to know them, we're going to move off of our presentation and we're going to get to see everyone speak and sort of talk about what they do in their individual communities. Please take notice of where they live. Healy and Shanti specifically work online. And so they work in real spaces and then also work online. So get to know these people, send them messages, share your contact information. And in 2023, as we roll out a website, which will have a directory of doulas across the state of Florida, we'd love to have you engage with people. And so we're looking for concrete actions. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. I think I saw Monica raising her hand just a little bit earlier, and we will ask questions at the end, but be thinking about how you can imagine working with the doula and ask those probing questions. I anticipate, and we all know there's going to be labor shortages in the near future, and this specifically is a way to deal with that. And so I think it's really important that we take concrete and real actions. And this is a really exciting association to association conversation. So far, the research I've done, we might be the first association of doulas in the United States. And this is a really big deal. It's really cool. We're going to now exit the Canva presentation, and we're going to meet everyone who is involved with the Florida End-of-Life Doula Association, which will be known as FIELDA. I'm going to hand it over to Shanti Vani. It's so important that we each get to tell our stories because we are informing the death positive movement, and we are a grassroots organization.
Yeah, when we realized that we had this FIELDA, F-E-O-L-D-A, I sort of thought, it's like Shrek's wife, she was pretty radical on self-love and fighting for a cause. So I thought that was kind of cute. Okay, my journey started long ago, but my training was in 2018. And as I said, I went to EOL and they did a really good program. So my mother had been with Alzheimer's and I had to move in with her in 2015 and spent half time with her, and my daughter shared in that responsibility. And it was a really beautiful thing to be able to be with mom through that whole period of her losing her abilities. But her sweet, strong spirit was always there. She died in April, and by June I was trained. I knew that's what I wanted to do. But I tried reaching out and building the business, and I didn't really get much response. And so in the period from 2013 to 2018, I had 7 family members die. And during that period, I also was taking care of mom and juggling my job at the hospital. I was a respiratory therapist for 11 years. There were a lot of stresses and a lot of grief was accumulating from losing 2 great grandbabies to both of my parents to my daughter with addiction and depression in 2015, the same year I had to move in with mom. And so I kept looking for grief support online, and I'd go to different groups, and I would be frustrated because what I was seeing was sort of either chatty or interrupty or just not, it wasn't hitting the spot. So I stumbled across the grief recovery method, and I was trained in that in 2020. So my business moved towards grief support. And interestingly, in the process of that, transitioning to grief support, the doula work came back around. It kind of came around full circle, because working with people with grief brought me into situations where they needed doula support. In fact, I'll share with you one situation that arose this last fall, about a year ago. I had a friend whose daughter had brain cancer since she was 8, and she was now 19 years old. And so she wanted to come to my grief group, and she came to the first meeting and she said, "I'm going to do grief. My daughter's in remission. She's fine. I just want to enjoy life with my daughter and my other 2 kids, a teenager and one in their 20s. And so I said, "That's fine. I totally understand. You don't want to do grief." So in March, I was called by her in the morning, and her daughter, her 19-year-old, had died. And she had already called 911. So the sheriff's deputies were at the house. And I quickly ate my oatmeal and headed over there and spent more than an 8-hour day with the family. And my role there ended up, because they were so blindsided by it, they had videos of her laughing and talking in her wheelchair in the store and eating chips and doing all kind of stuff just the day before. So this was a very sudden change. But I had to negotiate with the sheriff deputies and their lieutenant, because they wanted to remove her body. They wouldn't leave the house until they removed her body. And I said, no, this family needs time. So to make a long story short, I was there as an advocate for the family. So I find in this work of doing this end of life and grief work that I personally come alive. I tell people, who knew that working with sorrow would make me so glad? That I can help people, and at the same time, I'm helping myself. I'm processing, I took the losses and I turned them into something that would help others. So I don't want to take too long here. So I want to answer the question that was posed, which is, how could we interface with the funeral directors and funeral homes? One thing that can happen is just link our websites to your bereavement section on your website, so people would know that we exist. In your general price list, you could have a line where you include our services there. You could have a doula taking up some space in one of the offices in your location. She or he could have their computer and do other stuff, but if need arose, they'd be right there. They would have a place in your organization. So it's just good to brainstorm all the different ways that we could possibly interface. The other idea is, let's go to lunch, let's have coffee, let's just chat, call me, let's get to know each other. Nothing like a good old phone call. There's so much that we can do and share. None of us lives in a vacuum, but our society tends to be so kind of isolated. People tend to be isolated. And so the more that we can do to connect, I think the better. Personally, in my world, I have been interfacing with my local law enforcement, my city manager, nonprofit organizations, anybody I can talk to about grief and recovery. We had a meeting of the law enforcement, the crisis center, the city manager, and a bunch of ministers in our town about how to reduce the gun violence, because there have been shootings and deaths. And so any way we can get in there and get to know each other, the more people get to know us, how we operate, who we are, the more the easier it'll be to want to call the person and get in touch. So trust is so important. I think if you trust, then you'll say, oh, call that person. But, you know, how do you build trust? By connecting, by sharing, by interacting. So I guess the last thing that I want to say is, I think what Ashley said, we're here for connection and collaboration. We're not competition. And I think that, you know, it doesn't matter what your politics, your religion, you know, if you're a cowboy or not, if you're a country, what color you are, we're just human beings in this. And it's so exciting to be part of a movement that is so essential, so important to our physical, spiritual, emotional well-being as a community. And I'm just so grateful to everyone here. Thank you. And I'm going to pass it on to Lynn.
Thanks, Shanti. So I'll reintroduce myself. My name is Lynn Principe, and I am a private practice end-of-life doula, and I'm also a funeral celebrant in the Tampa area. My business is called Dearly Beloved Life. You can find me on the interwebs. So my journey began in 2006. I was caring for a great uncle for 7 years. He was well into his mid-90s, and he taught me a lot about what dying with dignity meant. I had no idea what that meant, but he was someone who was not an easy person to deal with, and he had his own ideas of how he wanted to live, how he wanted to die, and he taught me how to be his advocate, and that's what I did for those last years with him. After that, I became a hospice volunteer for about 15 years. My first patient I want to tell you about, because it was a really special way to be introduced to hospice. He had been a truck driver, and he was a poet in his younger years. And by the time I met him, he was completely blind. And his dying wish was to have all of his poetry put down on paper and put into a booklet that he could share with his family. And so our time together was spent with me writing furiously as he recited his poems from memory. And I remember he was so grateful for that time we had together. And it's just ironic because I feel like I was the one that really got a gift from that time. So in 2018, I heard about what an end-of-life doula was. I felt like that was made for me. It was definitely a calling at that point. I became an end-of-life doula. I also became a conscious dying coach. So I coach people through those domains of life that I talked about. And I also became a life cycle celebrant. And so I perform funeral ceremonies for about 4 or 5 local funeral homes. And in addition to being at the bedside, like I said, I do the funeral ceremonies, and I work also with the Veteran Cemetery, and I do burials at sea. I'm also a licensed massage therapist and a Reiki master. And I find that having those extra tools in addition to my doula work is really helpful because, like Shanti said, trust is a really big part of what we do. And sometimes people aren't ready to talk, but they might want some comfort. So I can give a light massage or some Reiki and start those difficult conversations. So that's helped to incorporate. I want to give you an example of a family that I served at the beginning of the pandemic. I was contacted by a woman whose young husband was in his last days. He was dying at home. She had never heard of an end-of-life doula until it was too late for me to speak to him and know what his wishes were, but she wanted support and she needed someone to walk with her through this difficult time. So I spent those last days with her and her husband. We played his favorite music, we read stories that he loved, and we held quiet space there in the bedroom while their 2 young children, they were at the age of 5 and 8. They were freely coming in and out of the room. And it was beautiful because the children had been a part of the conversation for months, and they had an awareness about what was happening. And that's something that we rarely give children credit for, being able to hold that space and understand what was happening to their father. And so when he died, the hospice came and bathed his body, and we had some time for ritual at that point and some goodbyes. And I want to share, if you could, Ruth, share the screen just for about 30 seconds. I want to show you some images I have from that time we had together. So you can see the children on the left. They decided that they wanted to put flowers around his body. And it was a very sacred time. They were quietly spending time with their dad and their mom and talking about what had happened as they put the flowers there. And then we did an anointing ritual, which I read the words to, and they did the anointing themselves. And then in the second picture on that slide, you'll see that the children were at the cemetery, actually digging a hole for the cremains. And I was the funeral celebrant for that ceremony as well. And I think about that a lot because the family was so involved, that part of his dying legacy was that death could look different. And I think those children will always have that memory. Death will not be this taboo thing that we don't talk about. And I think that was a beautiful gift that he gave them. So in 2020, I became a conscious dying educator, and I taught over 150 doulas all over the country. As an educator, I feel passionate about initiating these conversations about death, which is why I always say yes to these opportunities to speak about what we do, because I want to encourage people to live their purpose with as much or as little time as they have. I continue to provide funeral services and serve private clients as an end-of-life doula, and I'm now serving on the board of the Florida End-of-Life Doula Association, and I hope to expand our visibility in Florida and to support the doula community through education. So I believe that death work is community work, and just like a doula can be a bridge between a hospice team and the family, we can also be a bridge between our clients and funeral professionals. So thanks for your time. I'm going to hand this back over to Ashley.
Awesome, thank you. I also want to express my gratitude for sharing this space with the panelists and for all of the participants that are here today. As Shanti said earlier, being a deaf doula or an end-of-life educator is definitely a calling. As a kid, I had a particular hobby of reading the obituaries, and I honestly thank my grandmother because she normalized death for me at such a young age. So after graduating University of Florida, go Gators, I worked in a whole body donation field. And it was my childhood best friend that actually pushed me into my purpose. Dominique, at the age of 27 years old, was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And without even knowing it, I instantly became her and her family's doula. And this is honestly where Ashley, the deaf doula, was born. To honor her legacy, I volunteer with the Colon Cancer Coalition to host events like 5Ks and art therapy to support colon cancer awareness. With more than a decade in the death care industry, ranging from being a direct disposer, funeral home liaison, cremation arranger, administrator, and operator, I launched Loyal Hands, an end-of-life doula consulting agency. We promote death positivity, which eliminates the silence around death-related topics by decreasing anxiety and dismantling the foundation of inequality, racism, and social marginalization that happens at end of life. I currently serve as the president of the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance, and my specialty is legacy planning and assisting families with closing affairs. I work online and in person with crematories and funeral homes in the Central Florida area. I pretty much do consults and follow-ups that honestly funeral directors don't have the time to do so. So I'm able to connect with families and just make sure that they are okay. And if they have any questions, just to be that liaison, as well as being a celebrant for several funeral homes and crematories in the surrounding area. I will share that my partnership has ensured that communities feel that they are more than just a business transaction. This has led for funeral homes and crematories to have more referrals, as well as reduce intake stress that they have with families coming in. I will also share that when I'm working within the community with funeral homes, we create events that actually just spread death positivity within our local community. And with that being said, if you want to connect with me, please feel free to drop it down in the chat. I love just conversation and just getting, just seeing how we can meet and collaborate with each other. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass this on over to Keely.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ashley. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm so grateful, like all of the doulas. It was a pleasure to join you recently at the leadership retreat in Daytona Beach. I want to send out a shout out to Eric in Brickell, Cameron Nogel in Jacksonville, and if Colette is watching, I'd love to finish the conversation we started at dinner. My specialization is in providing emotional, spiritual, and comfort care to families and individuals who have been impacted by death, loss, and life transitions. I work predominantly in the pre- and post-death arena, although I do sometimes work in the sacred space of active dying. My journey really began 10 years ago after my father died, when I pivoted from my 26-year hospitality career into a period of internal curiosity, learning, and spiritual growth, which is what led to my desire to serve and engage in meaningful work. I didn't know at the time what that would be. I trusted that what I was learning would serve me and others. For a time, up until the start of the pandemic, I lived and worked at the Amrit Yoga Institute, where I learned practices for emotional and spiritual healing, such as Yoga Nidra, a sleep-based meditation. This practice has profound healing effect and provides techniques for quieting the mind and alleviating stress symptoms. In addition, it's supportive for guiding people into a space where they can experience themselves as more than their thoughts or emotions. I've also trained in integral breath, which is an experiential process of clearing out suppressed emotions. This breathing technique triggers a natural process of cleansing and purifying the body and the psyche. When my mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer in 2016, I took a deeper inward dive and trained as an end-of-life doula through the Conscious Dying Institute. That was in 2018, I believe the same year as Lynn. I was drawn to the emotional impact of death and loss because I myself was experiencing emotional intensity and overwhelm. So I went on to become a grief recovery specialist and compassion coach. Just like you, you're not a therapist, yet you're constantly in the space of providing in-the-moment support and care around grief. I'm not a therapist either. There are lots of ways to provide emotional support. I'm there as a spiritual coach, a compassion coach, and as a grief educator. If consumers need professional mental health services, then I refer them. Before engaging with potential clients, I determine if we're a good fit with the use of a client intake and interview application process. I typically work with clients online, and I love the fact that there's no location limitations with the use of Zoom. I provide grief recovery classes in a small group format, no more than 8 people, or privately one-on-one. The classes are held over a period of 7 to 8 weeks. We meet weekly for up to 2 hours, between 90 minutes and 2 hours. And my next class does start in January. And you can find all my 2023 class dates listed on my website. I would love the opportunity to partner with small funeral homes to engage in activities that would be mutually beneficial, financially, practically, and emotionally speaking. I can provide ancillary services to your clients as well as for your staff in alleviating the impact of high emotional stress, be it through grief recovery classes or even team wellness events to include yoga nidra or grief education. For anyone who is wound so tightly that they're unable to sleep and recharge properly, please take advantage of a complimentary yoga nidra recording that's available through my website. That's kiwimward.com. I remember when I worked on cruise ships, how I would wake in the middle of the night with a busy mind. I was carrying all my to-dos in my head, and I was living and working in a very high stress environment. Yoga Nidra has been highly supportive for me to unplug from my mind and my thoughts so that I could experience deep rest and rejuvenation and fully recharge. It's an easy practice, no experience is required. So I invite you to reach out to me through my website under the Contact Me page and set up time for us to chat. It can be on Zoom or a phone call, or if you're close to Ormond Beach, let's get together and meet in person. I would love that. thank you so much for your interest and being here today. And I'm going to hand you back over to my friend William. And he took my grief class last year, by the way. Thank you.
It did. It was a really helpful class, and it was really interesting to get you to know you and your practice and kind of delve deeper into this. I'm keeping an eye on the time, and we are getting to the end of our time, so I'm going to be very brief. But I'm a known in the IFDF. I'm on every social media platform there is. If you have a question, I am available and everywhere. You all have my phone number, my email, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, everything. So if you're curious and want me to make introductions, just please reach out. I need to make apologies to everybody. It seems that our chat is disabled. And I know we had a question from Monica, Anne Marie, and Diane. I've got emails from Erlene, and I appreciate that, but I apologize. We will be emailing out links to the stories mentioned, YouTube about the Health Decision Day, and the individual websites of all of the speakers today. So that will come with you after Ruth is telling me, but I apologize, the chat seems to be disabled. We are now 10 minutes out, and it seems like we've got some questions. If Monica is still available, let's try the Q&A section this time instead. The chat just doesn't seem to be working correctly. From there, I know we have a question from Anne Marie St. George, and I've got your email, and I'll be adding you to the list. And Diane and Erlene, I also have your email to share with the group. So let's turn it over to Q&A. We are so close to the end of our time here. And I'm also going to turn it over to Ruth, who has the full administrative control of that Q&A.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, everyone. It was just fabulous. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for the information. We really appreciate it. We have several questions right now from John, our executive director. And I think I sent it to you, Will. Do you have it in your?
There we go. There we go, John, Mr. Mixon. How do doulas get paid? And as a contract worker, are they consulted by funeral homes? And a follow-up question is, how do they interact with hospice care in hospice settings? Because hospice provides so many kinds of service, and that's a very complicated question, but amazing questions. For anyone who wants to jump in and talk about how you interact with funeral homes, I know, Lynn, that you do have relationships with funeral homes already, and Ashley, you do too.
I'll start the answer. For myself as a doula, I offer different packages. It's important to me that people can afford my services, so that I do charge for them. So I don't do it as a volunteer, but I offer a sliding scale. So I offer packages of planning visits, and they might include a massage as well. So sometimes like 5 to 10 packages, and I have a price for that. And then I offer a price for bedside vigil, because I offer to be at the bedside through the dying process, and that could be for days. So we don't get reimbursed by insurance. This is a private pay practice, at least for now. And as far as my work with funeral homes, I'm an independent contractor. So I'm paid by the service. Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to add to that, Lynn. Just as you said, I am an independent contractor when I work with funeral homes. So they just hire, I pretty much fill in the gap or the space that they need assistance in. And that is making sure, a lot of the time, like I said earlier, is creating that space that funeral homes can follow up with the communities that they serve. And also just making sure something as simple as signing a card, making sure like delivering that card that the individual at the funeral homes has signed to the family. And it is a sliding scale for me as well, because I offer a number of services. So I get in contact with said funeral homes and crematories, and we work out an arrangement, and we just go from there.
Reading a message from Anne Marie, just a comment to say thank you to you all for what you're doing. This is truly a blessing. Thank you so much. I'd love to circle back if Anne Marie has a question. Go ahead and put that in the chat box. Ruth, have you received any other questions maybe?
Well, not yet, but I do have a few. Can I ask mine?
Absolutely, please do step in.
Okay, so where can a funeral director train to become an end-of-life doula?
Ooh, that is a great question. There are so many end-of-life doula training platforms on here. I'm sure everyone on the panel today has great recommendations. I would often suggest that you can go on our NEDA website our National End-of-Life Doula Alliance website has a selection of trainers. And I often say, interview them and actually look at their look at their agenda and their schedule and see if that's something that aligns with you. It's kind of like when you were going to mortuary school, you actually vetted those schools to see which one actually aligned with you.
Yeah, and you know, I just went out online. It's kind of like when I go to Travelocity, I look at all the tickets and then I was like, yeah, this one fits just right. There's a flavor, there's a verbiage that they use on their sites, their pictures, their, you know,
Right.
their racial makeup. I mean, who knows? Whatever grabs you, you'll be attracted to it. So I went around and around, and then I just came back to that one several times. And when I clicked on it 3 times and that was the one, I was like, yeah, I'll just do that. But there are many good programs, and we'll be developing a list of them. I'm sure the ones that we know of that we could vouch for, we'll be developing a list. And when we get our website up, we'll put it there, I'm sure.
And that's really important because licensing isn't necessarily a known here. And so the point of our association is to create a kind of quality control of people who we have vetted and feel offer high quality services. There's no barrier to entry into this marketplace. And we feel forming an association is integral at this very early moment in time, because we need to sort of see who's entering the marketplace.
Great
So-
question.
Oh, sorry, go on.
No, I was just saying, great question.
And I was going to respond a little bit to the how we're paid. In my transforming grief work, I meet either one-on-one or in groups, and I meet either in person or on Zoom, and I just get it's individual payment. You know, according to, and it is also on a sliding scale, but for every dollar I bring in, I put a dime into my scholarship fund. So in my spreadsheet, I have a 10% goes into the scholarship fund, and I have that. And of course, if I overdo my scholarships, big deal, you know, I'm okay. Right now I have a client who I'm meeting with one-on-one, and 5 years ago, he was in a motorcycle accident and he is paralyzed from the armpits down, requires 8 hours a day of care. He's not a veteran, so he doesn't get veteran services. And, you know, the experience for me of working with him is educating me on how to help someone with that type of a spinal injury. And so it's a benefit to me and to him that I just to take care of him gratis. So we, you know, it's nice to be our own boss, because we can decide. We can, somebody's really difficult or doesn't really want to show up, then, you know, usually they'll leave. If they're not really engaging, they'll kind of drift away, and that's fine. A lot of times with grief, people will approach you and then they'll get their foot in the water and then they'll get scared and they'll run away. So anyway, that's
Thank
all.
you. Do you have any other questions, Ruth?
Well, just one more, and I think you, Will had already answered the question, because I was just wondering about if doulas are regulated or licensed in any way. And Will mentioned that that's one of the reasons why you formed the association, try to be a gatekeeper and to vet the doulas. So that's very good to know. I'm just wondering if you all had any tips or suggestions on how to support children experiencing loss.
Well, I have one client with sickle cell anemia, and her mother-in-law died, and she was wanting support for her 5-year-old twins. And so her doctor at UF referred her to me, and I told her the best way to support the children is to support the parent. That's what I have.
Yeah, that is going to be my recommendation as well. And like, I can share a situation that I had where a family called me at 4 o'clock in the morning because of the fact that they lost somebody unexpected. And the first thing that I did after our initial conversation was reach out to Shanti and just to say like, hey, grief support, let's acknowledge that this was an unplanned and let's have grief support. But because a lot of times families can be a little hesitant reaching out to funeral homes, especially with an unplanned death, because of the fact funeral homes can seem so final. And them calling me, I was able to hold their hand, give them some grief support, and also connect them to a funeral home along this journey and just normalize it and just really make it a human experience.
Definitely. Thank you.
And that referral is powerful. And that is really what this conversation is about. For referrals to be coming from funeral homes and for doulas to be giving referrals. That is a huge, huge opportunity. I've had the opportunity to speak with hospice recently who was considering bringing doulas in to the association, and really behind the scenes, the conversation really was about differentiating hospices. This is a value add to businesses and can differentiate your funeral home with a much bigger reach, a much deeper community reach. And these kinds of partnerships can be incredibly powerful.
Definitely. I'm just wondering if there are any other questions because it's now 4:31. Are there any other questions?
If there happen to be any other questions, again, I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, everything. Reach out to me and I will help coordinate in conversations. I invite you to ask a doula out for coffee, to have a phone date, a Zoom date. We're so accessible. And soon we'll have a directory up where you can see across the state of Florida, a lot of different doulas.
Well, I just want to say thank you again. Thank you, Ashley, Shanti, Kelly, Lynn, and William, for sharing your expertise, for sharing your passion about what you do. And this is a very important topic for all of us to know. And I think we can all appreciate, the call for partnership with you. So you've given us, our members, much to consider.
For sure. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So let me conclude this webinar by reminding everyone to forward your Florida license number to me at rbedell, that is BEDELL, at IFDF.org to request the CE credit if you have not already done so. Our next Straight Talk, titled Update on EPA's Evaluation of Formaldehyde, the NFDA Formaldehyde Study, and Best Practices to Manage Risk for Embalmers, will be presented by Dr. Jasek Ennis, instructor in the Funeral Service Education Program at the Jefferson State Community College. The webinar will take place on Wednesday, December 14th from 3:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. EST. For more information on this CE course and to register, please visit www.ifdf.org/events. Thank you again, Ashley, Shanti, Kelly, Lynn, and William. Thank you all for the presentation this afternoon. And thank you to everyone for attending this Straight Talk. And please stay safe.